Hi, and welcome to another episode of SWITCHCast, a podcast delving into the world of film brought to you by the team at Switch. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Charlie David Page.
I'm Jess Fenton.
I'm Daniel Lamon.
And I'm Jake Watt.
It's Thursday, the 10th of August, 2017.
On this week's show, I chat with writer-director Francis Lee about his extraordinary debut film God's Own Country, showing at the Melbourne International Film Festival.
And as always, all our reviews and giveaways.
Let's get straight into it with Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. Major Valerian, played by Dane DeHaan, and Sergeant Laureline, that's Cara Delevingne, are on a mission to rescue a one-of-a-kind artifact and deliver it to the titular city of a thousand planets, Alpha. Upon their arrival at the space station, however, things seem askew.
After centuries of peace and prosperity, an unknown force wants to destroy all we have created.
Agents Valerian and Laureline, you have less than 10 hours to find the threat and eliminate it.
Let's get to work.
As Valerian and Laureline track down the perpetrators, they uncover some secrets which have been haunting Alpha, and they must choose between their orders and doing the right thing.
The whole universe is after us.
We need the two of you to be the guardians of our future.
The highlights of this film are truly the two leads. This is officially the first time I've seen Delevingne in a role that I haven't utterly despised. While 20 years may have passed since writer-director Luc Besson's The Fifth Element was released, sadly his creativity hasn't evolved, and the number of shots that could have been ripped off his previous masterpiece are countless. We've seen all of this before. Similarly, the script cobbles together different scenarios from a number of storylines from the comics that the film is based on, but it all seems a little too hodgepodge to be anything above average. Be mildly entertained, but Valerian won't rock your universe. I'm giving it 3 stars. And we've also got some comments on Facebook, one from Kathy Weatherall. She agreed with my written review, saying that Rihanna was completely unnecessary to the story, and Clive Owen was far too transparent, and that even the film being in Luc Besson's presence didn't make it any better. Jess, you've also seen this one. What did you think?
Yeah, unfortunately, I thought that this was a poor man's Fifth Element, and I'm so obsessed with the original film, The Fifth Element, and so are so many people. The other day, I actually got the privilege of sitting in on a Q&A with Luc Besson, and someone asked him if he had the chance to make The Fifth Element today, would it be the same or would it be more like Valerian? And I was sad to hear that he said it would be more like Valerian. Recently, with the 20th anniversary of The Fifth Element, I wrote a retrospective and talked about how great the practical effects and costumes and stuff were, and it really broke my heart to hear that Luc Besson thinks that those are faults in the film and he would like to embrace the CGI part of it, but that's where this film goes so wrong. It's just so much of it isn't there, and it's just it lacks depth and it lacks coherence, and it looked a bit naff, if you ask me.
Yeah, the film is very sugary, it's overly saturated, it's extremely fake, and I think that the characteristics from The Fifth Element, those quirky characters that they had and like the real effects are really what made that movie something different, something unique, and that's really what's missing in Valerian. This is just flat and it's unexciting.
But I think that that's possibly almost... I remember thinking it very odd in all of the campaign, the publicity campaigns and all the talk around Valerian, that it was constantly people bringing it up as a comparison to The Fifth Element. Even before it was released, when no one had seen it, that was the thing that people kept comparing it to, which is fine. It's the same director, but Luc Besson's filmography is much wider than just The Fifth Element. And when you're setting up your audience to go into a film, comparing it with a classic, of which The Fifth Element actually is a legitimate science fiction classic, you're already putting the audience in the headspace of thinking about that as a point of comparison, which it inevitably won't stand up to. And like realistically, if he was to release The Fifth Element now, I don't know whether The Fifth Element would stand up as well as it did. It was very much a product of its time and place. But by comparing it as pointing it as a point of comparison, I think they've kind of already put the film on the back foot in a way. I'm still actually quite intrigued to see Valerian, but I think having The Fifth Element in audiences' minds may not have been the best idea.
I have this mental image of like Rihanna playing the Chris Tucker role in Fifth Element.
Oh my god! Imagine.
I'm not really too sure. Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that. It's confusing, a little bit scary. I don't know whether it makes me want to go and see Valerian.
Here's where Luc Besson shot himself in the foot. He admitted this. He's grown up with the comic books Valerian and Laureline, which is the original title. And when he made The Fifth Element, he was extremely inspired by those comic books. So now, 20 years later, he's actually gotten a chance to adapt them. But because no one's heard of these comic books except him, and everyone has heard of the Fifth Element, instead of comparing the source material to the Fifth Element, now everyone is comparing the Fifth Element to this new adaptation. And that's where you're going to get tangled.
It's similar to what happened with the Disney adaptation of John Carter, the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. Like, that was another example of a piece of source material that had been picked to pieces for a century from everything, like particularly from things like Star Wars. And so to adapt it now, you kind of can't help but see all the things that have now become derivative of it. And as much as it came first, as much as those comics precede The Fifth Element, there's a point of connection between them and an established classic film. Like, the audience is going to see it as derivative and repetitive, regardless of what you do. I mean, it's, sometimes that kind of sentimental, I've always wanted to make it thing works. Like, hey, kudos to Peter Jackson when he tried it with King Kong, which was mostly successful. But you also have to be aware of the fact that sometimes your emotional connection with an old piece of source material isn't necessarily going to translate into the film that an audience is going to want to see.
And maybe Besson was a little bit too close to this piece. The other thing which really strikes me as strange is, as Jess mentioned, the actual title of the comic series or the graphic novels is Valerian and Laureline. They've actually taken Laureline out of the title here, and to my understanding, given Laureline, Cara Delevingne's character, a bit of a backseat role. She's much more of a sidekick, I would say, than a partner to Valerian. I don't know, Jess, if you felt the same way, but I do feel like she was kind of pushed off to the side a bit, which in this day and age seems like a bit of a weird choice.
Not quite, because she doesn't exactly play a damsel. In fact, there's a scene where she actually saves Valerian herself, and he's the one that pushes the romantic side to their relationship, and she's the one that keeps holding him at bay. So it did bother me, and I was really surprised when they changed the title. And hearing Luc Besson talk, he's certainly not a misogynist. He awards and applauds strong female characters. When you look at Nikita and Lilu and what have you, and Matilda, even the title now, Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, it still doesn't make sense. It's too long. All the publicity just cuts it off at Valerian anyway. But it isn't even really about a City of a Thousand Planets.
No, I mean, we don't even get to that point until about, 45 minutes, an hour into the film. So it's quite weird that is the central premise behind the title.
I was confused. I'm not sure why, and I have a feeling that the marketing team might be kicking themselves after that now anyway, but I know, smarter minds than ours, I guess.
Well, you can read my full review of Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets at maketheswitch.com.au, and you can catch the film in cinemas now. Next up is Wind River. Jake confronted this bleak frontier, but did it leave you feeling cold?
Wind River follows a young FBI agent, played by Elizabeth Olsen, who teams with an animal trapper, played by Jeremy Renner, after the body of a teenage Native American girl is found frozen in the snow in the mountains of Wyoming.
Sheriff's office.
I need emergency assistance.
What's your location?
The Wind River Indian Reservation.
This is a homicide.
I knew that girl. She's a fighter.
They have 6 officers to cover an area the size of Rhode Island. Maybe you can help.
I only know what the tracks say.
What is it that you do again?
I hunt predators.
So why don't you come hunt one for me then?
Wind River is the final installment in screenwriter Taylor Sheridan's American Frontier trilogy of screenplays, which also includes Sicario and Hell and High Water. Elizabeth Olsen plays yet another cute but hopeless FBI agent. Like Benicio del Toro in Sicario, Jeremy Renner plays a brooding dude with godlike survival skills and a tragic past. Writer-director Sheridan has cited Clint Eastwood and Michael Mann as influences, but rather than evoking either of them, or even snowbound thrillers like A Simple Plan and Fargo, this rather plainly filmed movie just feels like one long episode of the Netflix crime series Longmire. Sheridan also really needs to move past his obsession with stoic tough guys and write a film where his female characters aren't merely trembling jelly or bitter ex-wives. 2 stars.
out of those 3 films that he's now kind of made his name with, this is the first time he's directed it himself. What's his chops like as a director?
Pretty ordinary, to be honest. So the director of Sicario had a pretty gun cinematographer on board as well. So Denis Villeneuve works as like a regular dude who's also moving
Roger
over to...
Deakins, one of the greatest cinematographers ever.
That is the guy.
Yes.
Who's also moving over to Blade Runner.
Yes.
So like Taylor Sheridan doesn't even really have that going for him.
And to be honest, like thinking about those films, the one thing I never struck me about any of those films was a screenplay. Like the Hell or High Water is great, has great performances, particularly from Jeff Bridges, and Sicario is an incredible experience of a film. But I never ever thought about the screenplays. So I think it's a really bold move to decide that you're going to rely on your chops as a screenwriter, but also your lack of experience as a director to kind of follow through whatever line of investigation he has with these films.
Well, I kind of think at this stage, like Taylor Sheridan has quite a bit of heat on him in terms of his previous screenplays have all been shouted in awards and
he got an Oscar nomination for Hell or High Water.
Yeah. And he actually does have some, previous directing experience, which is kind of something which annoys me a little bit since Wind River is actually marketed as being Taylor Sheridan's directorial debut.
It's not his debut.
No, so his debut is is a movie called Vile. It was a horror movie that came out in 2011.
Oh, right. So the kind of thing where it's like, let's ignore that debut. Let's pretend it didn't happen kind of thing.
Yeah, which I've never actually heard of before. I don't think I've ever read anything about like another director who's gone back and scrubbed their history of shitty horror movies from their filmography.
Like Scorsese admits and Cameron admits to the fact that they started out with Roger Corman films. And David Fincher occasionally mentions the fact that he did Alien 3. Like he generally doesn't like to talk about it, but it's interesting that thing you said about the fact that like the stoic tough guy and the female characters trembling like jelly, like it is actually kind of a tired trope. And particularly with the female characters, because Emily Blunt was so remarkable in Sicario, and that character was so remarkable for all of those reasons. But once you start to repeat an idea, like it just starts to feel like a lack of originality.
It even comes down to sort of like the casting, I think, as well. Like Emily Blunt is quite you wouldn't really sort of associate Emily Blunt with like like a tough guy or an action role, and she like plays like a pretty gung-ho FBI agent in Sicario. Elizabeth Olsen, same deal. You wouldn't really associate her with playing a door-kicking FBI agent. And then you have
an Avenger. Of course you would. Same with Emily Blunt. She was in that Tom Cruise
Edge of
film
Tomorrow,
where she was like the leader of the Edge of Tomorrow. Thank you. She was the leader of the pack that was kicking alien ass.
If Sheridan doesn't have the ability to pull it off in his writing, then is it a trope that he needs to kind of let go and explore something else?
I think it could just easily invert the roles. Just have Jeremy Renner playing an inexperienced young FBI agent, and have Elizabeth Olsen playing the grizzled hunter or whatever. Just I guess like sort of make the female role the more competent one, as opposed to being led around by the weathered
tracker / femme fatale.
Yeah. They can do double duty in that role. It'd be sort of multi-layered.
I'd love to see Elizabeth Olsen as a grizzly mountain woman. She can do pretty much anything. I'd happily see her do that. It's much more interesting than seeing her stand around holding a purple ball of light and looking confused.
I'm more taken by the idea that she's an out-of-her-depth FBI agent. Can there really be such a thing in real life?
This is like female FBI agents, like Clarice Starling, like really, Taylor, like,
The thing is with Wind River, it is like she is comically like out of her depth. Like, so she can't even drive to the sheriff's station in the snow. At the start, like she's introduced like lost in the snow without a GPS, and then the hunter has to go out and like drive her car into the car park. It doesn't really get any better. Like throughout the movie, she remains this kind of punching bag, and she doesn't really have like any sort of moment where she develops competency. Like all the way through, she's just kind of passenger on Jeremy Renner's mission. Another thing as well is the fact that it's all set on this Indian reservation, and the murder girl is also Native American. The best actors in this movie are Native American ancestry actors, but the hero is this white dude, pretty much. Yeah, it's a really strange kind of almost like a throwback to like a 60s Western style screenplay, which doesn't really gel in 2017, I think. I watched it, I was just kind of like, ugh, like, do you have like any fresh ideas to bring to this whole thing? Wind River is in cinemas now, and you can find my full review at maketheswitch.com.au.
Also hitting cinemas today is an Inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power, Al Gore's follow-up to his 2006 global warming documentary. Jess went to see this one, so did it make your blood boil?
I'm pleased to say not as much as the first film, and that's in a good way. 11 years ago, former US Vice President Al Gore gave us nightmares and guilt, informing us that not only were we on a path of self-destruction, but that it will, in fact, be our own fault. Now, a decade later, we're still fucked, but there are rays of hope. Sun rays. Yes, recovering politician, as he likes to call himself, Al Gore, is back. Our summers are still hotter, winters are still colder, and natural disasters are becoming more common and more fatal. But now we're all about renewable energy. It is possible, and it is happening right now. Wind power, solar power. This, ladies and gentlemen, is our future and the saviour of our planet. In an Inconvenient sequel, Truth to Power, we see the charismatic Al Gore teaching the world about renewable energies, but the main focus is the behind-the-scenes magic act he performs at the 2015 UN Climate Change Conference.
It's crunch time at the Climate Change Conference in Paris.
Still some really tough negotiations going on.
What would it take to shift to renewables?
I'm talking about breaking the impasse. Virtually every nation in the entire world agreed to get to zero greenhouse emissions. It is unprecedented.
It's time to put America first. That includes a promise to cancel billions in climate change spending.
Al Gore shines as a passionate activist, as a leader, and as a beacon of hope. How does one judge a film that could potentially save the world? By giving it 5 stars and letting everyone know that this is the definition of a must-see film.
That's a very lovely reason to give a film 5 stars,
yes,
to actually convince everybody to see it. I remember when the first one came out and just the enormous impact that it had. Just be a young person going to the cinema and seeing someone speak so eloquently about the state of the world and what we could do and the possibility of what we can do. I remember when they announced this sequel, I thought it might be a little unnecessary, but from the sounds of it, it's continuing to fulfill the good work that the original started.
Oh, no, it's very necessary. And one of the most fascinating things about the timing of this film, and like The Big Sick and The Handmaid's Tale, is that Trump's presidency makes it so much more prevalent. Trump's presidency is addressed to a degree in the film, especially since, like I mentioned before, that the main focus is the Paris Agreement, and recently he has reneged on that and pulled the US out to the detriment of, the planet. This film is terrifying. I mean, this one is a lot more hopeful than the first one, obviously, but it is truly terrifying.
Which is a surprise, because you think if he felt the need to make another one, he would be sitting there going, guys, like, back in the first one, like, guys, we're fucked. This one's like, guys, we're really fucked. But it's so, the surprise I had was hearing people say, no, this is a lot more hopeful. It's like, how
it is
when it's clear everything's really going to shit.
Yeah, but at the same time, as hopeful as it is, when you're watching the UN Climate Change Conference happen and everyone cheering and getting excited about the Paris Agreement, in the back of your mind going, the US just pulled out of this. And then at the same time, they're like, terrorists are attacking our city, and people are dying on the streets while you guys are talking about, like solar energy and stuff. I just have to point this out because I think I actually gasped when this moment happened in the film. Al Gore is walking down a corridor at the Climate Change Conference, and he runs into the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and Al Gore sort of shakes his hand just really quickly and says, I'm paraphrasing here, but blah, 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 thank you so much for like all your help and everything that you've been doing. And Trudeau says, oh, you're welcome. He goes, but it wasn't me, it was the Canadian people. And I was just in awe of this moment. I was like, no politician in the world would ever not take credit for something and hand it to his own people. No. And I think that just goes to show how amazing Justin Trudeau is, as well as Al Gore.
One last question about this film before we move on. Does it have another potential Oscar-winning song and in the credits? Because that Inconvenient Truth won an Oscar for Best Original Song as well. I think it won documentary, and I think it also won Best Original Song. Does it have another great tune at the end?
I don't remember.
I think that's a no.
I wasn't paying attention. I was too busy. Like, I took my brother to the screening and we just basically looked at each other at the end of it and went, God, Donald Trump's a fuckwit, isn't he? Kind of like even the beginning of the film is this beautiful shot, like this aerial shot flying over like glaciers and stuff like that with like a bunch of sound bites playing in the background. And one of them is Donald Trump talking about how they need to take away Al Gore's Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh my God.
It needs to be stripped from this man. It's like, are you kidding me? Oh my God, this is actually happening. So we were just, my brother and I were so engrossed in conversation at the end of the film with everything we'd just seen that I honestly wasn't paying attention to the final song, and I'm sorry to whoever was performing it.
That's fine. I'm sure we'll see when the Oscar season comes next year whether or not Al Gore rises again with another bopping hit.
Yeah, toe tapping hit about climate change. Yes, absolutely. So don't miss, please, God, do not miss an Inconvenient sequel. This is a have-to-see film. It's in cinemas now, and you can find my full review at maketheswitch.com.au.
Now for horror fans, Annabelle Creation is in cinemas from today. Daniel, you confronted the doll. Is this another horror hit, or should we be running away screaming for our lives?
Only if you like your horror served lukewarm. The second film in this offshoot franchise from the terrific Conjuring films, Annabelle Creation is a prequel to 2014's Annabelle, which was itself a prequel to 2013's The Conjuring. This new film goes further back in time to sometime in the 50s and the creation of the demonic doll. When a small group of orphan girls and the nun in charge of them come to stay with a reclusive family in the middle of nowhere, they unlock a secret evil that intends to take their souls, living in the form of a doll created by the toy maker who owns the house.
Sister, you always say that even though we can't see God, we can feel his presence. In this house, I feel a different kind of presence. An evil one. It's coming after me. Because I'm the weakest.
There are a few good set pieces and some bursts of humour in this film, but any hopes that it would be another surprise like last year's Ouija Origin of Evil disappear quickly. Annabelle Creation is a disappointingly derivative film, pulling on too many tired tropes that appear as homage and end up being just lazy storytelling. Director David Sandberg does a commendable job, but he doesn't have the ambition of Conjuring director James Wan, and in the end you just wonder why they even bothered. In a post-Babadook world, this just seems very slight. I'm giving Annabelle Creation 2 stars.
Now, Daniel, looking at the timeline of these Conjuring movies, I mean, even your explanation was extremely complicated.
It's ridiculous.
But then one we have to look forward to now is The Nun.
Look forward to?
Oh, well, okay.
We're going to use the phrase look forward to. Because I mean,
but where does this all fit in together?
I think when I reviewed Ouija Origins of Evil, I pointed out the fact that horror sequels do not work.
They're all a bit same, aren't they?
Exactly. And so one of the nice exceptions to that was actually the Conjuring films. The first Conjuring is terrific. The second one's also very, very good. But none of these offshoot films, we've had 2 Annabelle films and The Nun coming up, but none of them have proved that there's any sense of originality in them. They're just kind of repeating tired tropes. Like, there are many moments in this film where I spotted very clear references to other horror films. Like, there's obviously reference to things like The Exorcist and stuff like that, but there were moments where it was playing on The Haunting, and moments where it was playing on Silence of the Lambs, and moments where it was playing like lots of things, but not in a way that was clever or playful, but just blatant. And so it just ends up feeling like you've seen this film before. Interestingly, one of the girls in the group of orphans is actually the same young girl that was in Ouija Origin of Evil, and she's also very good in this. It is nice to see a horror film where most of the characters are young girls, which is actually quite lovely because they bring their own kind of playful energy to it. But the film itself, like, you just feel like you've seen it before.
Well, I think you get that gist even from the trailer.
Yeah.
You look at it and you're like, this is nothing new. There's nothing original here. And even from the trailer, the scares don't look very extreme.
I mean, there were people in the audience that were sitting there shitting themselves, but they were shitting them. They played the trailer for It before the film, and they were shitting themselves in that. But I think that in itself is kind of the problem. Where The Conjuring has tremendous ambition, and James Wan knows a lot about the medium that he's working in, and has, tremendous knowledge of the classics of the genre, the classics from the 70s, the classics from the 50s, and is playing on that kind of operatic style. These offshoots, and most of the studio films we've had, horror studio films, don't necessarily play on the idea of style or substance. They're just trying to get really cheap scares to an audience as quickly as they can. It's proof by the fact these films just keep being driven out as quickly as they could. That was one of the reasons why the prequel to Ouija was such a surprise, because it had substance and ambition and style. But then you flip it to the other side, where you've got films like Get Out, and you've got films like The Babadook, or It Follows, or The Witch, really beautifully made horror films coming from the same kind of American Western machine that have tremendous creativity to them. And you kind of look and go, why are they not learning from this?
I think the guy who directed Ouija, though, he's like Mike Flanagan.
Yeah.
He's like probably one of the best American horror directors at the moment. So they were like really lucky to Hasbro really lucked into having him, work on that potential franchise. Whereas Annabelle has David F. Sandberg, the guy who did Lights Out, which was one of the shittiest horror movies I've seen in quite a while. It was based on a short film, and the short film was actually scarier than the movie he ended up making out of his short film.
We talked about this last week when we talked about with Andy Muschietti, where the assumption that he being put on it was just to kind of be a director to churn it out. That's again another problem with these films. That was one of the great surprises about Mike Flanagan doing Ouija: Origin of Evil, was that it was clear it was a film that hadn't been meddled with. It was a film where he'd been allowed to do that. And it got a great critical response and great audience response and did pretty well. So you kind of I hoped with Annabelle Creation that they were going to follow suit, particularly because James Wan is a clever man and makes very good films.
I think when you've got the concept of The Conjuring and you know it's financially successful, then it just becomes this cookie cutter idea of let's see how much we can get out of
that's
this.
Another problem that this film has, is that they are trying too hard to stick to The Conjuring. Because a problem that I had with Annabelle Creation is it's pulling on a very tired trope, which is the idea of religion-based horror from a Christian perspective. There are many masterpieces that have that, like Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist. They all play on that idea. But you've got to be able to really offer something new to be able to do that. The Conjuring barely gets by pulling that off because of its operaticness, because of its scale, and because of how stylistic it is. But this film plays so much again on the thing of, there's lots of crucifixes around and there's a nun and they're praying to God for help. God is not in this film. There is no help from God. And the other thing, which is the backstory they're giving Annabelle, is really not very good. The doll does nothing. Like, occasionally it turns its head. There's this great moment where one of the girls accidentally hits the doll in the face with a ball, and I started to imagine a much better film, which was Annabelle the doll taking revenge to this girl for hitting her in the face with a ball. But what it actually is it's a demon that has decided to cling itself to the doll because of a backstory that involving a dead daughter, a dead child. And I shit you not, this demon looks like one of the pixies from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Like, I really expected Kenneth Branagh to walk out with his wand and try and, haphazardly put it into a cage, because it just looked ridiculous. It didn't, and it's just one of the things I was like, I've seen this before, and this religion-based horror thing is not interesting. The Babadook doesn't pull on that. The Witch plays with it intelligently. It Follows doesn't play with it at all. Get Out doesn't play with it at all. There are other stories to tell. Why does the studio horror film have to keep relying on demons and God? Because there's so much more horror to find than that.
Because
it's familiar,
it's simple,
and hey,
because it's there and
it worked for The Exorcist, so let's just beat that storyline to death until everyone's sick to fucking death of it. But again, it's a thing of I'm a hardcore horror buff. I love horror. It's one of my favorite genres. Annabelle Creation is not made for me. It is made for those people that want to go to the cinema for a date night so you can have a bit of a scream, have a bit of have some fun, and then at the end leave. So if that's all you want, if you just want a forgettable horror film, then Annabelle Creation does it perfectly. If you want something of substance, another possibility of a horror classic, look somewhere very far away. You can check out my full review of Annabelle Creation at maketheswitch.com.au, and if you feel so inclined, you can go and see it in cinemas now.
Well, finally in cinemas today is The Wall. Jake put himself in the firing line for this close quarters war film, but did you make it out unscathed?
Set in 2007, US Army sniper Shane Matthews, played by John Cena, and his spotter, Sergeant Alan Isaac, Aaron Taylor Johnson, are sent to investigate a pipeline construction site in the desert of Iraq. The two are suddenly attacked by an unseen sniper, known as Juba, who pins an injured Isaac down behind a crumbling wall.
What's your position? Over.
We got a sniper. High caliber weapon. Requesting extraction.
Sergeant, I need your exact location.
Say that again.
Sergeant.
You got an accent. Not American. You a sniper? Where are you, man?
Through its use of static location, no music, minimal characters, and extensive dialogue, The Wall has the feel of a one-man play. A return to low-budget roots for blockbuster director Doug Liman. If you're looking for something action-packed like Shooter, Sniper, or American Sniper, stroll on. This film shares more similarities with Rodrigo Cortez's Buried and Joel Schumacher's Phone Booth. Unfortunately, like Phone Booth, there is minimal tension in the second half, as the script mainly emphasizes the stale ideological conversations between Isaac and Juba. Although things eventually pick up for an action-packed climax, the film is hurt by its inability to create characters the audience actually gives a shit about. 2.5 stars. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 2.5. 2.5 stars. Sorry, Jess, you saw this, didn't you?
No, that's okay.
Are you saying sorry, Jess, because you interrupted her? Or sorry, because you're sorry she saw this film?
I'm sorry she saw this film. This film is pretty boring.
Yeah, no, I found this film incredibly disrespectful above anything else. I mean, it's set during the Iraq War, and they've turned, these two people who are on tour, who are in combat. One of them has, they don't sort of really harp on this, but he clearly has some sort of PTSD. And they turn it into essentially a Saw film. It's about a sniper who's fucking with this American soldier and playing mind games with him and stuff. And it's just, God, it was so bad. And not only that, but I love Aaron Taylor-Johnson. And this was a classic case of a brilliant actor in a shit film.
I think the worst thing about sort of, if you're, I guess ever pinned down by a sniper, I think the worst sniper to be pinned down by is one of those really cliched, Hannibal Lecter mind game style snipers who, have the coordinates for your walkie-talkie and can taunt you and, do voices with accents and all that stuff.
Yeah, so sorry if this is a bit on the spoilery side, but the guy, the sniper who's hunting them down, yes, he's Iraqi, but he can impersonate a perfect American accent, and he happens to have technical skills, and he is the world's best sniper. But he claims during the film that he was a school teacher and he's a regular run-of-the-mill guy, and and he's not a bad guy, and he's just trying to make things right and all these sort of things, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? How can you have all these skills on one side, yet you just claim to be a regular run-of-the-mill guy on the other? It's such bullshit, and it was just...
The movie kind of wants to make this sort of political point and stuff, and it just kind of just dives into the cliches.
To the war and to serving soldiers everywhere and what have you. It was so disgustingly disrespectful. I really hated this film.
Doug Liman, he directed Edge of Tomorrow and The Bourne Identity, didn't he?
Yep, and but he started off with Swingers, that John Favreau and Vince Vaughn movie, which is, I think he filmed Swingers on for $50,000 or something, and then he moved on to these massive budget blockbusters.
Yeah, you get Jumper, Fair Game as well.
Yeah.
Jumper's got the best. I mean, Edge of Tomorrow was fucking terrific, but he doesn't exactly have the best track record.
He also filmed 2 episodes of The OC.
Oh, he did Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I love that movie.
I do have one very important question for both of you that I need to know. Do either John Cena or Aaron Taylor-Johnson take their shirt off at any point?
No.
Not really.
Brent's not here, so I have to fulfill his role. And to be honest, I've only seen one scene from Trainwreck. I was on a plane back from Queensland with my boyfriend Paul, and he was watching Trainwreck on my iPad because he was hooking into the plane's in-flight system. And the only bit I watched was the bit where John Cena was the sex scene. I leaned over and looked just because I wanted to see what John Cena looked like without his shirt on. Yeah. And then the scene finished. I didn't even listen to it. I just watched it and then went back and kept reading my book.
Yeah, that guy's a brick shit house. No, unfortunately, both of these guys are fully head to toe.
This film's dead to me.
There is some sweat there. They are pretty sweaty. They do get like, it's kind of like a fear sweat, so probably not that great.
But hey, look, Nocturnal Animals gave us Aaron Taylor-Johnson naked sitting on an outside toilet, so...
Yeah, playing like one of the most disgusting characters ever. He was so good.
You can run into the wall in cinemas now and check out my full review at maketheswitch.com.au.
Run into the wall. What a great
I worked on that.
That'd be a better way to spend your time than seeing this movie.
Well, now let's check out some of the upcoming films in our trailer wrap. We'll kick it off with the trailer for Darren Aronofsky's new film, Mother.
What do they want?
They've come here to see me.
Come quick! You're insane! You're insane!
All I'm trying to do is bring life into this house. Open the door to new people, new ideas.
I'm so sorry.
Get out of my house! You give and you give and you give.
Look, they could not play a single piece of footage from this film, and I would still be off my mind excited about it. Like, it's Darren Aronofsky. Darren Aronofsky makes a film, you go and see it. Honestly, I don't, and I know this was probably, people will be horrified by this, I've not seen a single film of his I haven't loved. And that's including the films that most people hate, like The Fountain or Noah. He has such a distinctive, interesting, bizarre view of the world and the way that he plays with film and the plays with rhythm and tone. And then you look at this cast, and the cast is just ridiculous. Like Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem and Domhnall Gleeson and, oh God, I'm probably forgetting like 5 or 6 other people.
Kristen Wiig.
But
Ed Harris, Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah, the thing that is so intriguing, I find the most intriguing about this film is that it's a thriller that he made very quickly in a very in a small scale, and yet he's keeping it a complete secret. No one knows what it's about. No one knows who's playing what. That in itself is intriguing enough when a great filmmaker decides, I'm going to just keep everything close to my chest, and you're just going to have to wait and see what I've got.
I think the poster is intriguing. It's a painting of Jennifer Lawrence holding a heart.
And there's another one. There's one of Javier Bardem on fire as well. Yeah.
You're like, what the crap is this movie? And not only that, but it has an exclamation point in the title. It's not just mother, it's mother! Mother!
What is great about this particular one is it gives us nothing to go on. Nothing. Like, we have no clue what this film is about.
It's a
I think someone opens a door at some point.
And all of us are frothing like fuck for it because of that.
We know there's like a house and maybe like a building that somebody is in.
Might be a mother.
Yeah, we assume. But it's also just an exceptionally beautifully made trailer. Like it's like a Fincher trailer. Like it's a cacophony of sounds and images that may give you nothing, that tell you nothing about the film other than it will be intriguing and bizarre. I cannot wait for this film.
Well, you don't have to wait too long.
Oh, good.
Lucky Daniel. Mother is in Australian cinemas on the 14th of September, so you can look forward to it then, and we'll find out what it's all about. Next up, let's have a look at the first trailer for Goodbye, Christopher Robin.
Mummy says you're writing a book to stop people going to war. I think your book is a jolly good idea.
You're the only one that does.
I'd really like if you wrote a book for me. I'd definitely read it.
Shall we go for a walk?
Aren't you working?
It doesn't seem likely. Ernest and I are putting your bear in a book. We're putting you in it too.
What will you call me in the book?
Your real name, Christopher Robin.
Let's be hunters in the snow. Come on, don't get frostbite.
The creatures in the story are toys. They're toys, but the woods are real.
Winnie the Pooh. It's rather inexplicable.
Yes.
Okay, so if like me, a couple years ago, you became obsessed with the film About Time, which also starred Domhnall Gleeson and Margot Robbie, and this one they finally get together. I'm just so happy.
I'm sure that's entirely was their intention when making the film. Let's pick up on that storyline and About Time, make a film out of it, and maybe we'll talk about a famous historical figure at the same time.
Yeah, maybe
we'll bring Margot Robbie gets to keep her horrible British accent again. No, but I am completely obsessed. I've been obsessed with for years Domhnall Gleeson, and I love every single thing he does. So this one really makes me excited. I'm so excited that people are embracing him as a lead man as well. So this one looks really sad. You know, you've got a guy's returning from war. He's got PTSD. He's got a wife. He's got a child, and to make the world happy.
A guy being A.A. Milne, the writer.
Yes. Milne.
Just some dude.
Yes, some guy, I don't know, whatever. And, to make the world happy, he ends up creating Winnie the Pooh.
I am a little worried, though, that there's not going to be a film in this. And like, it's that thing of, it seems like a great concept on paper to talk about the origins of Winnie the Pooh and the man who created it and his son who inspired it. But I'm worried that there's not going to be a story in that. Like, there was barely a story in Finding Neverland, and that the story that Finding Neverland presented was far less interesting than the actual story behind the Llewellyn Davis boys and J.M. Barrie. But I'm kind of a bit worried with this that there's flashes in the trailer that suggest this film might be really interesting, and then flashes where it looks like it may just be quite run-of-the-mill.
The part of the trailer for me which is most intriguing is following Christopher Robin. We're kind of left hanging with that. The real-life Christopher Robin who ended up with a huge amount of publicity as a really young child. And from the trailer, it looks like something that his mum is pushing, but his dad is shying away from. And I think the encounter that he has with the media and the public seems to be one of the more interesting angles that this film might take.
It's the original Kardashians.
If the film explores that, then I'd be far more interested, because there's an untold factor about a lot of the inspirations for the great children's literary classics. Like Alice Hargreaves, who was the inspiration for Lewis Carroll for Alice, had quite a difficult adulthood, having been chased by the phantom of the character that was inspired by her. The same for Peter Llewellyn Davies, who was one of the inspirations for Peter Pan. His brother Michael. His brother Michael was gay and committed suicide by walking with his lover into the ocean because he felt like he'd lost his identity because of being connected to Peter Pan. And Peter Llewellyn Davies threw himself in front of a train. So if this film that did interest me, and I hope that the film does explore that, because it's that thing of, yes, it's really interesting to talk about the man behind the creation of this very famous literary character. But what's it like to be that famous literary character? What's it like to then have to grow up from a very young age being defined by someone who is inspired by you but isn't actually you?
It's also interesting that it looks like it's going to explore the imagination of Christopher Robin too, which I think is really cool. I hope it's got a bit of a Monster Calls feel to it, and we kind of get to see inside some of the play of Christopher Robin that he and his dad experience, and that kind of becomes the stories of Winnie the Pooh. I think that would be quite interesting if that was a creative angle.
As much as Disney will let them, because Disney does still own the rights to the Winnie the Pooh novels. So, I mean, I'm actually also quite interested to see how they navigate that problem, because it's similar with Mary Poppins, I think, that Disney actually have the rights to them.
You may well be right, but we can catch Goodbye Christopher Robin in Australian cinemas on the 23rd of November. And finally, let's have a look at Super Dark Times.
Let me see that.
Give it back.
You want it? Come and get it. Stop! Stop!
Are you okay?
There's just a lot going on right now.
Josh?
We should go back.
What?
I don't know, but I just keep thinking of his mom.
Don't go back there.
You need to listen to me.
No, you need to listen to yourself. You're scared all the time.
This movie looks pretty interesting to me. It kind of gives me the sort of Larry Clark's Bully, Tim Hunter's River Edge style vibe, like that really exploration of teenagers sort of coming into adulthood, and then some kind of like dark event, just like clouds that journey, and like all the friends will sort of turn on each other, or something grim will happen, and but with samurai swords, so which is always great. Like you can always like throw samurai swords.
The samurai swords are very prevalent in the trailer.
It's just like a samurai sword will just like attract so much more interest in a trailer. Like no matter what the genre or what the context is. This is what
Annabelle creation needed. It needed a samurai sword in its trailer.
Annabelle needed like a samurai sword and maybe like a like a Chucky crossover.
I would watch a film where Annabelle went after people with a samurai sword. Like who would not want to watch that fucking film?
That sounds like Chucky, actually.
Yes, but like, imagine a doll without a facial expression. She's going after that girlie here on the face of the ball. That's what she's doing.
With a sword that is 3 times bigger than
One of the things that intrigues me, though, about the way this film is written about, though, is it keeps bringing up the fact that it's pre-Columbine.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that it keeps making, but doesn't really come across in the trailer.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's to do with that fact, like, I know that we've just spent our time joking about the presence of one of the boys having a samurai sword, but before Columbine, the idea of children having things that could be perceived as weapons, carrying them around would not have been as big a deal. It would have only been after April 1999 that all of a sudden there'd be an awareness of your children as a potential threat and the objects that they own being a threat.
Columbine wasn't the first time a kid has brought a gun to school.
No, but Columbine wasn't a school shooting. It was an act of terrorism. So in previous cases, students had walked into high schools in America with a handgun. Like one student might have walked in and maybe shot one or two other students. Columbine was multiple weapons over multiple points around the school and in the area around the school, conducted as if it was an assault. So all of a sudden, and it was things that involved car bombs and explosives and multiple forms of ammunition and weaponry. So I suspect, if this film is going to be commenting on pre-Columbine in any way, it's that fact of the freedom that teenagers had to own things like a samurai sword and to be able to carry those things around, which could not happen now because you would instantly see that as a potential threat.
And I think it's going to be as much about the dealing with the issue that happens in the film, whatever the twist may be, and how these kids all react to it, how they all deal with it in their own way as well.
The story sounded a bit like Donna Tartt's novel, The Secret History. A group of young people commit a violent act that they have to keep a secret, and that secret comes back to haunt them, which is, if anyone wants a good book recommendation, that's one. Donna Tartt's The Secret History.
Well, Super Dark Times looks fantastic. There are heaps of other trailers that are also out this week, including the first look at Call Me By Your Name and the full trailer from Brigsby Bear. To check out all these trailers and more, head to youtube.com/MakeTheSwitchAU.
1 week into the Melbourne International Film Festival, and audiences have already been spoilt with numerous incredible films, making the long lines on cold nights well worth it. One of the most acclaimed films of the festival is Francis Lee's God's Own Country, a powerful and moving film about a young farmer in Yorkshire and his romance with a Romanian immigrant that's already been called a queer film classic. I was tremendously lucky to chat with Francis about his debut film while he visits for the festival. Thank you for chatting with me today, and congratulations on this incredible film. What's your experience been like so far at MIF? Have you been to Melbourne before?
No, this is the furthest I've ever been in my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I started my journey and went to New Zealand first, and I did Wellington and Auckland, and then came to Melbourne.
So you must be exhausted.
It's okay. I'm quite tired, but it's okay. And Melbourne is a lovely city. It's a really cosmopolitan, beautiful. The food is incredible. I'm going to have to get another seat on the plane. I've put on so much weight. And the reception for the film has been so incredible.
Well, I was going to ask, because it's received awards in Berlin, Edinburgh, Sundance. Were you expecting that? How do you respond when something you've made that's clearly so personal is received and embraced the way that this film has been?
It was super surprising. I had very little sense of what would happen to the film once it had been made. I just tried to focus and be very blinkered on making the film I wanted to make the way I wanted to make it. And I was very blessed with the financiers, with the BFI in the UK, who allowed me to do that. And so I didn't really think beyond finishing it, having a film, what would happen to it. So when it was selected for Sundance, it was an overwhelming experience.
So where did this film come from? Because it's such an emotionally raw film. It seems like it must be a very personal film for you. Obviously, you grew up in that particular area of England. Where did the film come from?
Yeah, so I grew up on those hills in West Yorkshire. They're called the Pennines. But I escaped when I was 20 and I moved to London to go to college. But then for the whole time I was away from that landscape, I could never get it out of my head. It felt to have totally informed who I was, emotionally and physically. And so it felt an incredibly natural place to go and explore for myself when I decided to make film. Consequently, I've moved back there. I've been living back on that hill for 2 years now. But also, I guess the emotional part of the film, that relationship, came out of this idea or this thing I was going through where I was trying to figure out falling in love and how difficult that is, and how vulnerable you feel, and how how hard it is to love and be loved. And so that was really the emotional heartbeat of the film I was exploring.
Obviously, they're very demanding performances from the two leads, particularly from Josh O'Connor. How do you navigate preparing an actor for that kind of performance? And then how do you protect them? Because they emotionally have to be very open and very brave to allow themselves to be as vulnerable as that.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of actors and a big fan of their craft. And I think it's a very, very difficult job, one that I couldn't do. And so, as you say, my mission as a director was to give them everything that would allow them to be vulnerable and open in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And that was protecting them. And so they knew from the get-go that they were my priority, and I would protect them above and beyond anybody else and anything else. In terms of preparing them, I love working from a character perspective, and I love detail. And so with both boys individually, I worked for about 3 months on building their characters.
Really?
So we worked from the moment they were born until the moment you see them in the film. And we worked out every single tiny detail, in great detail. You know, all their childhoods, their adolescences, their experiences, their relationships, but also their preferences, like... Did they have sugar in their tea? What colour socks did they like? Where did they buy their socks? You know, every single detail. So by the time the two boys turned up on set, they were totally immersed in these characters. They were totally there and knew who they were, what they wanted.
And was a lot of that informed by themselves, about their own experiences, their own background?
I mean, as an actor, I think you always bring a bit of yourself. Both Josh and Alec, who play the two leads, particularly Josh, are transformative actors.
Yeah.
So, as people, they are the antithesis of their characters. Josh, as a person, is funny, open, polite, very smiley, and from the south of England. You know, he comes from a very kind of middle-class background. And Johnny is quiet and sulky and difficult and from the north. And so they both manage to totally inhabit these characters, which I love. I love that way of working. And that gave them a lot of security in what they were going to do in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Because they were so well prepared.
Yeah.
I also made sure that the crew were people, particularly the brilliant Joshua James Richards, the DP, was the type of person who was not just an artist with the camera, but a guy who the boys would relate to, who would be sympathetic, and who they could build a trusting bond with, because I knew that camera was going to be so up close and personal.
Yeah, they're both, particularly from Josh O'Connor, I just... The level of self-hatred in that character and seeing that fall apart was... At points I remember thinking how almost impossible it was to watch, just because it was so heartbreaking. From a kind of technical level, working in that landscape, obviously you're very familiar with it, but there's a great sense of authenticity in not just the landscape, but also the farm life. I grew up on a farm in Queensland, so a lot of the things that were we're sitting in the audience and there's the preg testing the cow and everyone around me is gasping. I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen my stepdad do that. Like, was all of that kind of pre-prepared in advance? That obviously you knew the lambing season was coming up, that you'd be able to rely on certain things happening. But in the process of making the film, did the landscape and the lifestyle inform kind of impulsive decisions in the storytelling?
No. I'm very, very precise and controlling, and I like prep. I don't like surprises. So what I actually managed to do was send the two boys away to work on farms for 2 weeks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so they kind of went, and Josh worked on the farm where we shot, and Alec worked on my dad's farm, and they went and they did long shifts, so they'd work 9-10 hours a day, and they did everything. They learned how to do everything in great detail. And that not only informed the farming, so they could do everything with the sheep, and they could do everything with the cows, and they could build walls and all of that, but it also impacted on their characters physically.
Yeah.
So they got cold to their bones, and they got miserable, and they got moany about it. And to me that was incredible because it translated to the characters.
Yeah.
And worked so perfectly. But I always knew I didn't want any fakery or...
Because you can't fake that stuff.
No. And
as much as an audience that doesn't know that lifestyle, that background, wouldn't know. You can tell.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that really struck me.
Yeah, I love to be immersed when I watch a film. And so I just knew that if I was watching this film and the scene where Alec Georgi is birthing a lamb, if they weren't Alec's hands and he wasn't doing that, I would always know that. And I didn't want to be in that position. I wanted to know that everything was authentic.
In the last few years, there's been an amazing kind of renaissance with queer cinema, particularly starting with Andrew Haig's Weekend. Like, I remember distinctly seeing that and going, everything has changed for the way that I view those kind of narratives, and particularly in the last 12 months, where it just kind of feels like this endless stream of masterpieces, your own included. Why do you think that's happened? Why do you think all of a sudden... I mean, these were films that usually would be relegated to, the tiny cinemas in obscure film festivals, and now you have a queer film winning the Oscar for Best Picture. Why do you think that's happened?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think you're completely right. I think it's particularly this year is extraordinary. You've got Call Me By Your Name. You've got hopefully God's Own Country.
Definitely God's Own Country.
As you say, Moonlight wins the Oscar. There's this great independent American film called Beach Rats. Fantastic Woman wins an award at Berlin. It's a trans story. BPM from Cannes, which I haven't seen, but I've heard amazing things about it. I honestly don't know, but it feels like these films are being taken primarily as film, as great films, not a niche queer story, and films that translate to a more mainstream audience.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for this beautiful film. It's honestly one of the most heartbreaking, hopeful, joyous films I've seen in a very long time, and
that's really kind.
I'm really excited for more people in Australia to see it. I think it'll have a great response.
You. I hope so. Thank you.
God's Own Country is one of my favourite films of the festival so far, but with a week left, there's still plenty more great films to come. Another film in the festival that totally blew me away was Luca Guadagnino's Call Me By Your Name, a coming-of-age story that has received some of the best reviews of any film so far this year. I often have quite strong emotional reactions to films, but this one totally broke me, to the point where I went home and sobbed afterwards. It's an astoundingly beautiful film, one of the most beautiful I've ever seen, with an incredible central performance from Timothée Chalamet. Expect this to feature big in the Oscar season later in the year. You can check out my full version of my interview with Francis Lee in the show notes at switchcast.com.au. You can also find my 5-star reviews of God's Own Country and Call Me By Your Name, as well as many other films in the festival, at our Myth mini site at maketheswitch.com.au.
We have a great giveaway for you this week. We have 5 Blu-ray copies of Berlin Syndrome up for grabs, a thriller about an Australian traveller whose holiday romance with a Berlin local goes from idyllic to terrifying when she discovers that she's unable to leave his apartment.
We're also giving away 5 copies of Get Out on Blu-ray this week, a Hitchcockian-style thriller with a wicked, biting twist. It's also one of the most acclaimed films of the year and already a horror classic. For your chance to win this great prize and all of our giveaways, head to maketheswitch.com.au/comps now.
So before we go, we'd like to offer some cinematic inspiration, with each of us suggesting one film you should see this week and why, in 15 seconds or less. So for me this week, it would be, spinning off Daniel's reviews from the Melbourne International Film Festival, Y Tu Mama Tambien. This is a film I saw back when I was in university. It really stuck with me back then. While it's not a quintessential queer film, it does touch on bisexuality and sex in general, but it's also just a really beautiful and life-affirming kind of film. It's a road trip movie as well as this amazing experience that these two guys and this woman have together. It's something I would definitely recommend you check out. Y Tu Mama Tambien. So, Jess, what about you?
Okay, and also inspired by Myth, I'm thinking of great festival films I've seen in the last couple of years, and one of my absolute and utter favourites, and you might have trouble tracking this down, and I apologise for that, but if you do, it's well worth it. It's a horror comedy called Deathgasm.
Oh, yes. No, that's on. You can get that on Blu-ray in Australia. I've got a copy of it. I haven't watched it yet, but I've got a copy of it.
Oh, okay. So everyone, Deathgasm is a New Zealand horror comedy about a new kid on the block who joins a death metal band, and they end up raising a demon and have to fight it in their little town. And he's one of the funniest, most original, fantastic films you've ever seen. I love the New Zealanders. They've got such a great eye and ear for comedy and horror. And I cannot recommend it enough. I absolutely love this film, Deathgasm. And just based on the title alone, I mean, come on, you got to go see this.
Go see Deathgasm. Daniel, what about you?
Well, look, I did have a film because I know that, Brent gave me some grief about the fact that I'm always the snobby film buff. So I did have a non-snobby film buff film for this week, but because Brent isn't here, I will reserve that for next week. So instead, I'm going to continue on with my Japanese theme and go with one of my absolute favorite films of all time, the 1988 anime masterpiece, Akira. It is... I saw it... First time I saw it, I would have been about 17. A friend of mine borrowed it from the video store. We watched it. It was probably the first anime film I ever saw. And I was so obsessed with it that I stole his copy that he borrowed from the video store, watched it every day for a week, and then burnt that copy so that I could continue to watch it every day for, I think, about 3 weeks. I just watched it every day. It's a post-apocalyptic film set in after a major incident which reduces Tokyo to smithereens, and it's set about 10, 15 years later where Tokyo's rebuilt itself. It's the kind of film that I would never have expected myself to love. It's about motorbikes and it's very grungy film, but it's honestly one of the best pieces of animation I've ever seen. I've seen it on the big screen as well, and it was astounding. So Akira, if you haven't seen Akira, see it. It's phenomenal.
That was Brent. And
shut up, Brent.
And Jake, do you have another Oscar snub for us this week?
I do. I've got like another animated movie to add to Akira. It's called Fire and Ice. It's a 1983. It's a 1983 American animated film directed by Ralph Bakshi, who's the creator of he was the director of Fritz the Cat.
And the animated Lord of the Rings. Let's not forget the animated Lord of the Rings.
And the animated Lord of the Rings. And some other interesting films. So Fire and Ice has a screenplay by the guys who wrote the Conan the Barbarian comics for Marvel. It has backgrounds painted by the guy who went on to do Dinotopia. And it has layouts by the dude who created Aeon Flux. Best way to sum up Fire and Ice is probably battle axes, barbarians, boobs, and...
One more B word.
Another B word.
Bums? Bums?
Maybe...
there's
bums.
Are there bison?
There's no bison. Maybe some bumblebees.
Bread?
Brent? Is Brent? I'm sure Brent
bread.
is. Oh, hi. Have you all heard this Eurovision song I like?
By the way, I'm so hungover.
Hi, Brent.
I miss you, Brent.
Anyway, Fire and Ice. Check it out. It's a really cool...
And it has nothing to do with Game of Thrones?
It has nothing to do with Game of Thrones, no. No. Just, it has a bit of fire, it has a bit of ice, and that's really the only similarity to Game of Thrones. But, and boobs, and bums.
Well, that synopsis really has me feeling quite hot and cold. And you can find...
Oh, so good.
And you can find links to all the articles we've talked about on this week's podcast at maketheswitch.com.au. Please subscribe to SWITCHCast on iTunes or your favourite podcast platform, and don't forget to rate us. And stay in touch on Twitter. I'm at Charlie_David. Jess.
I'm Miss Jess _Switch.
Daniel.
At Daniel Lemon.
And Jake.
At Jake Chatty.
Like it, follow it. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at MakeTheSwitchAU to stay up to date with the latest reviews, news, trailers, and giveaways.
And you can find all the notes and links to everything we've discussed on this week's podcast, as well as other episodes, by visiting switchcast.com.au.
On next week's show, I'll be sharing my verdict of the tech thriller The Circle.
Plus, I'll be reviewing Logan Lucky, the film that brought Steven Soderbergh out of retirement.
And we'll have even more from the Melbourne International Film Festival.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you all next week.